I head up the Americas for Oleeo. I am online across all social media. If you'd like to, find me, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter and all that. So if you want to connect afterwards, feel free. And just a quick note, I, for many years, was in many of your shoes. I was a practitioner at large enterprise organizations and then made the switch to HR tech about 7 years ago. So today I'll really use that lens of being a practitioner as I go through today's session. So without further ado, let me get into the agenda. So I always like an agenda. We have a few areas that we're going to cover today, and hopefully by the end of this session, you'll have some good takeaways to take back and make changes or things to think about. So with that, let's just talk about for a second, where we are in the world. Listen, we know it's a really, different environment, new norms, a lot of economic uncertainty. And certainly what we're seeing at Oleeo as I talk to our customers, and then also a lot of different practitioners across the globe, is, uncertain, workforce needs, and it's changing. And what I think is the most interesting is depending where you sit, you may be at an organization that is, has slowed down or is put in those hiring freezes. On the flip side, or you could be an organization where you're just hiring more and faster than ever before. And it's just this dichotomy that we're seeing. The other piece, which has, certainly always been a challenge, but is even more so now, is around the recruiting functions and being overburdened, even more so. What we've seen in the past couple months is, it's now an employer-led market versus a candidate-led one. And that's resulting in a lot more applicants and a really higher volume of those applicants and candidates for the recruiting teams to deal with. And then finally, when I think about D&I, there's always been a strong focus on that, which is amazing and great. But right now I'm really hearing a fear of sliding backwards. This past month in the US, unemployment rose faster for women and people of color. And then just this week, I read in the paper that the IFS has issued a report stating that British moms are 50% more likely to have lost their jobs versus British fathers. And as a working mom myself, it's a little disheartening. So, there is this fear of sliding back. So that's where what we're seeing right now, just to give a backdrop. And then moving on, if I can get my slides to go forward. I thought it would just be helpful to just really define diversity and inclusion. So let's start with diversity, just to put us all on the same page, because there's a lot of definitions. For me, I think of diversity as being the who's around the table, who's being recruited, who's being promoted. And I think diversity can be in any dimension, and it can be used really obviously to differentiate people into groups from one another. And I think overall though, it's about empowering people by respecting and really appreciating what makes them different. And again, this can be in a variety of different areas. It could be obviously gender, ethnicity, but also age, religion, disability, sexual orientation, education, national origin. I'm sure all of us together could come up with a really long list. But I like to think as diversity as hopefully a shorter term problem. But when I think of inclusion, that tends to be a little bit more of a longer term one. And so let me talk about what I mean by inclusion. To me, that's very much the how. It's the behaviors, the cultures, and the practices to really achieve those benefits of diversity. And it's really about making an effort where people who have different backgrounds, as we had just defined, that they're both culturally and socially accepted and welcomed and treated equally. It's about belonging, a sense of belonging, and really feeling valued. And it's really about engaging, everyone. So it makes them feel valued. And then that also helps them if they're feeling valued, then they're more likely to perform even better within your organization and function at full capacity. And obviously right now that is so important, especially as we're all dispersed. I mean, here I'm working from my house with a very clean bookshelf, I might add. So now that we've just defined a bit, diversity and inclusion, let's move on to the second agenda item, establishing a business case. And what I think is most interesting is that the business case is super strong for diversity and inclusion, but it's really changed from a statement or a vision to a really high profile goal over the years. And the most important part is it now has funding and the resources behind it. And really companies have realized the path to success in D&I is through recruiting. And, I like this slide a lot because there's a lot of different stats here that you can use. So take a picture. I think we're sending this out afterwards. But, if you do need statistics to help build your business case, this is a great slide for that. And I think the next slide here, which I really love, I actually should tell you, I stole this from Gartner this past fall at a conference I was at, which feels very, very far away. And what I love about this is it shows how diversity really drives results. But so when you combine diversity and inclusion, that drives even more results. And that really is the important piece. So let me give you another great example here is there's recent research that came out from Great Places to Work. And they discovered that publicly traded companies that had highly diverse and inclusive workplaces thrived before, during, and then after the Great Recession. And they defined the Great Recession as 2008 in that time period. For me, I happened to be working at Lehman Brothers at that time. I was there till the very, very end. And it was an intense time period, similar but different to where we are right now. But here's the interesting thing. These companies that were, much more diverse and inclusive, listen to this, they gained a 4 times larger stock return than the S&P 500. So if I said to you, hey, if you could outperform, the S&P 500 by not 1 time, but 4 times, and I gave you the answer to do that, 4 times the S&P 500. To me, that was just incredible. So, we know talking to lots of different diversity and inclusion heads of diversity, D&I really starts with recruiting. And it's so important not to lose the gains that we've all made in recent years. So it's really important. You have to continue to build and develop and maintain and retain the diverse workforce in order to drive that future growth and performance. Remember, 4 times larger stock returns. That's the Wall Street gal in me. And so let's see my slide. So as I said, success in D&I starts with recruiting. What's interesting is 73% of diversity and inclusion leaders identified influencing diversity recruiting efforts as their top priority. But only half of them felt confident that they could actually achieve this goal. And this was a stat from Gartner, by the way. And you combine that with only 35% of chief diversity officers say they have employee demographic data. This is really leaving the majority without hard numbers to support their work, which is obviously really difficult. And here's the other piece. Most recruiters also think their function lacks a D&I strategy. So, there's lots of room for improvement here. And let me tell you more what again, if I can get my slides to go forward. So we're going to talk a little bit more. So just to recap, where we are right now on our agenda, and I'll keep doing that. We've defined D&I. We've established what the business case is and talked a bit about that. But the real fun is actual doing. So let's talk about some of these recruiting D&I essentials. And I'm going to dive into these 4 requirements for a D&I strategy. And literally, you can read them. I think they're, so incredibly important that the words literally, say what it is. But it's really, you have to measure and then attract, ultimately engage, and then once you've engaged everyone, select. So, and I'm going to go into all of these 4 points in detail, but it's really critical. I think the most important thing when I think about all of this is that you have to hardwire D&I into your recruiting process throughout the entire cycle. And that is critical. If you leave out one part, you're not going to have the results that we'd all really love. So let's get into it. First piece. The first piece is measure. So hopefully you have some data, and but if not, start collecting your data. And once you have that baseline, you want to bring together your relevant data. for the complete picture. So hopefully you have it. Now it's just bringing it together, possibly from different systems or different areas or Excel spreadsheets, maybe, hopefully not. Once you have that, it's really important to know your metrics and analytics. And I get this question a lot where people say to me, well, Jeanette, what's the difference between metrics and analytics? So this is what I like to say from a definition standpoint. Metrics may measure one data point. It might be like a percentage of female applicants for a role, answering the question what. So what's going on? But when I think about analytics, that's about connecting and measuring multiple data points, answering the question of why. So again, metrics is the what, analytics is the why. And so let me give you some examples. It could be an analytic might show the attributes that drive the selection of a candidate. In other words, what factors are driving the selection of a candidate for a role. It could be used to answer questions like, why are more white males being selected for a specific role? An analytic could show that there might be a bias towards certain educational backgrounds, or maybe when a hiring manager is involved. You know, hopefully that's not the case, but you might be able to start to see that through analytics. And so, you know, and then the last stage, last piece is really about, you know, sharing these insights from your data and your metrics and your analytics, really to gain buy-in and drive change. And I talk to a lot of people and they're like, you know, what's a great way to share it with different leaders? And there's a great book that I really love. It's called Storytelling with Data. And I always mess up the author's name. Her name is Cole Nussbaumer Knafik, something like that, but Storytelling with Data. And so if you want to, you know, take a deep dive in storytelling with data, the whole key is to have a, you know, sort of a beginning, sort of this, you know, crisis point where it's like, oh no, what's going to happen? And then, you know, an ending. And so she goes into that in really great detail. So highly, highly recommend it. I don't know her at all, but it's just a fantastic book and I am a big bookworm. Okay, so let's go into the next point, okay? So the next point of a second requirement for a successful D&I strategy is attract. Because that's the key. If you're not attracting, you know, candidates, well, you're sort of dead in older. So one way to attract is actually to use technology to ID gender bias in your postings. For example, you can avoid or balance the use of gender-charged words. And we actually at Oleeo do this native in our system. And so I'll give you an example. And this is a screenshot, sort of, you know, can't see it too well, but one of our customers actually found by using this that they were using in their job description the word strong 12 times. So it was really easy for them to, okay, strong, well, that might be turning off some females, but certainly no one would really want to use the word strong 12 times. So that was something that was quickly caught. They were able to fix it, replace it, done. And because, you know, for us, we have this within our system, it's really helpful because the recruiters just have it at their fingertips. So it's really important for whatever you're doing to really make these tools and change and processes and data and insights part of your process, because it will lead to greater adoption and ultimately use. So now let me go on to the next slide and talk about the third requirement for a successful D&I strategy, engage or engagement. And so when I think about that, it's really important to tailor your processes to different candidates in order to build stronger relationships with your top candidates that you really want to go after. And it's really important to consider more than your usual pool of candidates. And this is important not only from a diversity and inclusion perspective, but also for the different types of roles that you're hiring for. So if you think about it, you may, you know, be at, let's say you're at a retailer and you have returning seasonal workers for different times of the year. You know, you're going to want to have a much different kind of process versus, I don't know, a super hard to fill tech role. So again, you want to really tailor it, whether it's from a diversity and inclusion standpoint or the type of role or, you know, a variety of different things. Again, you can imagine like the different cuts that you can do. So let me give you an example just to bring that to life with one of our customers, the Met Police. And I just think it's a great example of the way you can engage your candidates. And it shows the critical role of inclusive content, combining that with automation. So the Met Police, and for those who don't know the Met Police, hopefully most of you do, they're the big police force in London. They really use data-driven insights to identify a dramatic drop-off of female candidates at the physical assessment stage. And what they also found was the content that they were showing at this stage in the process, it showed a male-dominant workforce. So you can imagine as a female, how did you feel? Well, I might feel excluded, maybe intimidated, certainly not welcome, certainly not included if we think of the diversity and inclusion. So what they did is the Met Police completely redesigned content at this stage. They created video content and it showed a much more inclusive workforce, and it really encouraged women to apply, and it reassured them that, hey, you can find success here. You can find success in this role. And by the way, all this content ultimately was automated, which was great because that just takes the burden off of the recruiters. So automation is key. So it resulted in the Met Police being able to increase the number of women participating and ultimately passing that assessment by 40%, which was huge numbers. So an amazing example of the critical role of inclusive content plus automation. So hopefully that brings it to life. So if I go on to the next slide. The last requirement for a successful D&I strategy that I'll cover today is select and selection. And an example I like is using data to score candidates for selection. And here I have a screenshot of our Oleeo example, and it shows why someone scored and where they did. So what we have is a recommendation in the system where you see a list of names, candidates are scored 1 through 5. 5 stars, we recommend you should interview them. Well, here, a recruiter, we know they're so busy, and if it has to go to another spot, recruiters are just not going to seek out the data because there's so much to do. And so again, it's really important. I said it before and I'll say it again, to be successful with the use of data in recruiting and decision-making, it has to be embedded into the process. So again, I said before, hardwiring those insights into whatever you're using is so key. And so again, just to recap, we're bringing at Oleeo all of our relevant, ATS performance data. We're using AI technology to automate and score the data in a bias-free way, no adverse impact, and then we're embedding those recommendations in the recruiting process at the fingertips. So that's like my quick, short presentation. What I thought I would do is just leave you at the end with some key actionable takeaways, because I always like to, if I'm spending time, what are my takeaways? What can I do with it when I get back to, my desk or office? Granted, we're all at our desks and offices these days, at home or wherever you may be. So here they are. I think it's so important to become a strategic and evidence-led function where you have data-driven automation and decision-making, because it's literally proven to result in great diverse hires. We saw that example with Met Police. And listen, in today's hyper-competitive market, because it is, and it's still intense, employers who are going to win are going to do so by leveraging data and automation and designing multiple recruiting workflows and then tailoring them to the roles and the candidates. Again, a vanilla one-size-fits-all approach is not going to, be the best approach for the most part. There might be some, areas that's okay, but for the most part, in general, it's not. And then the high volume of candidates that a lot of people are experiencing right now, it really means that you as an employer, you need to find ways to reduce the administrative burden on your recruiters and ultimately the hiring managers too. You got to pinpoint those top candidates, expedite the hiring process for them, and then again, leverage the data to automate and inform the recruiting steps and the decision. Reduce that workload on the recruiters, but help them make these data-driven decisions, because that's, that is the, that's when the magic happens. And again, listen, we talked about there's more pressure and focus to move the needle in D&I, again, even with some of the, the past months, like step backs. So, recruiting, we really need to hardwire D&I into our processes, We have to shape the D&I strategies that deliver the ultimate results and remove bias from recruiting processes. Get a hardwire D&I into your recruiting process with the goal of rooting out the bias and really focusing on the core competencies and what is the ultimate, reason why you're hiring people. And it's important to do this across the entire recruiting lifecycle. Do it with confidence that the automation and the AI is right and it's unbiased, and therefore you can trust it. And that, in the end, is going to raise the quality of hire and your effectiveness, as well as your recruiting efficiency. I mean, that's the magic, being effective and efficient, magic. So that's what I have for you today. We have some resources for you as well, which you can find on the Oleeo website, or I think it might be being sent out. But I really appreciate the time today. Thank you for having me, and please be safe and be healthy and be well. Thank you.
We have a couple of questions around suppliers to help get data for their selection process. And I'm sure I already know what you're going to respond with on this one. So what supplier would you recommend to help get data for the selection process? Or actually, is that something that you guys typically do? Is that something that you guys are able to help with?
Yeah, I think it's something that we can actually help with. We'd be more than happy to chat to people more at our stand. So do take a wander to the exhibitor hall and have a chat with some of my colleagues there. Yeah. They can tell you a lot more about the selection criteria that can help you pinpoint D&I at scale.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And do you work alongside other technologies as well, or do you have everything sort of built in that these guys are able to utilise sort of straight away?
You can do most of it within our ATS itself. We obviously have a large integrations ecosystem of partners. So there are various partners who will be able to link into our ATS and work on their technology as well. I think my team over at the booth will really be able to explore that with you if it's something you're looking at. So please do come along. Please do ask those questions to my sales colleagues. They will be more than happy to walk you through those sorts of things.
Amazing, excellent, thank you. And do you have any, perhaps any best practice tips for designing recruiting processes that do root out bias? Do you have any sort of, any tips that you might be able to offer?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's quite a pertinent thing right now. I mean, with everything going on from this weekend around the world, not just in the US, it's really important that recruiters demonstrate their commitment to corporate cultures based on inclusion and the power of diversity. And you can do that in a variety of ways, starting from the attraction itself. And we've seen some examples of how to actually de-bias your adverts. And then also just make sure that your sifting and your selection processes are machine learning that doesn't actually have inherent bias in it. It's really just blind screening, which is probably the best way forwards to just judging people based purely on skills and competencies. And then, like the Metropolitan Police example that JEANETTE presented, just actually keeping them going in the system, nurturing them with content that really celebrates inclusion. I think inclusion and inclusive value propositions are the core to great D&I recruiting right now.